The piercing wail of the silent drill klaxon shattered the stillness of the control room. Inside the steel belly of the USS Franklin Pierce, 700 feet beneath the Atlantic, every crew member froze, not in fear but in precision. It was the kind of quiet that only existed in places where one mistake could mean 100 deaths. Except one man moved. Seaman Brooks, 19, lean, restless, barely 2 months out of basic training, lunged toward a panel thinking he was helping. But this wasn't basic anymore. 1 second later, the auxiliary sonar array went dark. Let us know in the comments which branch of the military you admire most. No one shouted. No one had to. The icy stares of 20 seasoned submariners said more than words could. A red light blinked above. Emergency override in progress. Commander Sullivan didn't look up immediately. He didn't have to. His voice, low and steady, sliced through the tension like a scalpel. Who touched the secondary array? Brooks' voice cracked before he could control it. I saw a reading, sir. You thought wrong. Sullivan finally turned, the faint hum of the reactor systems behind him. He had been in the Navy for 23 years. He had seen combat. He had surfaced through Arctic ice. But what terrified him most was not the enemy. It was error. He stepped forward with the deliberate calm of a man who knew exactly what he carried. The weight of 134 lives and 18 nuclear warheads. Seaman Brooks felt his throat tighten. This wasn't how he imagined life on a submarine. Not like the Navy brochures. Not like the movies. The rest of the crew remained motionless, heads tilted slightly, listening without appearing to. The command room was a tight metal space, layered in rivets, dark panels, blinking displays, and a pressure no drill could simulate. Lieutenant Marsh, the XO, gave Brooks a look that would have frozen seawater. When we run silent, he said, coldly, we don't guess, we don't assume, and we sure as hell don't touch anything unless ordered. Brooks looked down. Understood. No, Marsh said, stepping forward. You don't understand. You're here to follow orders, not to improvise. This isn't a college debate. This is a machine of war. Sullivan remained quiet, folding his arms. Then, quietly, resumed the drill. The lights flickered. Systems rebooted. But the atmosphere, they didn't shift back. It stayed frozen in place, everyone alert now, not because of the drill, but because of the kid who broke it. Brooks returned to his post near the aft controls. Face flushed, hands trembling slightly. He was a good kid, eager. Too eager. Sullivan had seen dozens like him. The Navy spit out hundreds of fresh-faced recruits every quarter. Some lasted, some didn't. But on a submarine there was no room for error, not even for learning. Below them, thousands of pounds of pressure pressed against the steel hull. Above them, the surface was too far to reach without flooding the entire compartment. Brooks kept stealing glances across the room, hoping someone would explain what had just happened. But the Navy didn't hand out explanations. It handed out consequences. 30 minutes later, as the simulated torpedo engagement resumed, Sullivan watched Brooks closely. The kid's breathing was fast, hands too tight on the panel. That was the thing about submarines. There was nowhere to hide. Every breath, every flinch, every mistake echoed. At 13:02 Zulu, the training concluded. Stand down, Sullivan said. The crew exhaled, muscles loosening, some cracked stiff joints. But Brooks stood stiff as a rail, unsure if he should move. Sullivan walked toward him slowly. The room went quiet again. You wanted to help, he said, but on this boat, wanting isn't enough. This isn't the kind of vessel where you learn by doing. You learn by listening. Brooks nodded quickly. Yes, sir. I understand you don't yet, but you will. He turned and walked back to the captain's chair, a reinforced throne in the middle of the chaos, facing the sea with decades of resolve. Brooks swallowed, then exhaled slowly, suddenly aware of how shallow his breathing had been. Around him, no one comforted him. No one needed to. The silence was the lesson. But Commander Sullivan was not finished. Later that night, while the crew rotated to the mess for their brief reprieve, Sullivan called Brooks into the briefing room. Only the dim emergency lights lit the table. I want you to write a full diagnostic on every sonar protocol we use, Sullivan said. Then memorize the emergency procedures top to bottom. You'll present it to the senior techs by 0600. Brooks hesitated. By 0600, sir, you wanted to learn, now you will. Sullivan didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. But the look in his eyes made it clear. This wasn't a punishment. This was survival. Brooks saluted, turned and left his hands clenched, but his mind beginning to understand. This wasn't personal. This was the Navy, and the Navy didn't give second chances. It gave structure, or it gave consequences. Commander Sullivan returned to his logs. Above him, the ocean was endless. Around him, silence. Below him, a crew that was learning slowly what it meant to live in the world's most dangerous machine. The dim corridor outside the briefing room felt colder than it should have. Brooks walked with short, silent steps, careful not to draw attention, though every movement on a submarine felt louder than it was. The steel beneath his boots hummed with life, the pulse of a machine that could kill its own crew with one mistake. He passed Petty Officer Lasky in the passage. Lasky didn't say a word, just gave a slow shake of the head. That was worse than yelling. Brooks entered the sonar bay, where the diagnostic manuals were stored, and pulled the heavy binder from the shelf. Its spine was cracked, the cover stained with coffee rings and decades of salt and sweat. Sonar Protocols, U.S. Navy Submarine Warfare Manual. Rev. Centivinci sat down at the small fold-out table bolted to the wall and began flipping pages. Page 1. Standard Passage Sonar Array Operation. Page 2. Emergency Frequency Recalibration. During combat simulation. Page 3. Protocol Breach. Disciplinary Procedure. That last one made him flinch. As he studied the dense text, the other crewmen passed by silently, some giving quick side glances, not mockery, not disdain. Something worse, distance. He'd become that guy. Every sub had one, the kid who messed up early. Most washed out, transferred, demoted. Sometimes they didn't even wait. They requested to be offloaded at the next port, ashamed to face the daily tension of silent judgment. But Brooks didn't plan to ask out. He was going to earn his place here, even if it broke him. Meanwhile, in the control room, Lieutenant Marsh leaned over the command console, whispering to Sullivan, "Sir, I reviewed the drill logs. That system breach could have corrupted our acoustic decoys." "I know," Sullivan replied, not looking up from the schematics in front of him. "And if we were under real sonar tracking, we weren't." Marsh frowned. "Sir, I'm not saying toss the kid overboard, but this is a nuclear-class hunter. We don't have room for mistakes like that." Sullivan finally looked up. His voice was cold steel. "Neither did you on your first cruise. You remember the ballast tank incident?" Marsh blinked. He remembered you were 2 seconds away from flooding the engine room. Sullivan continued, "But someone gave you another shot." Marsh didn't respond. Sullivan tapped the schematics. "We don't train perfection. We train recovery. Let the kid struggle. If he doesn't rise, he'll be off the boat by next port." Marsh nodded, slowly, then returned to the instruments. Hours passed. The sub's internal clock ticked its endless beat toward 0600. Brooks stayed glued to his chair, reading, writing, memorizing, flipping pages back and forth, tracing emergency cable maps with his finger like they were the veins of a living organism. 530. He stood outside the sonar station with a tight binder in hand. His eyes were red, his uniform wrinkled, but his spine was straight. Inside were 3 senior sonar techs, along with Lieutenant Marsham's crossed, clearly skeptical. "Seaman Brooks," one of them said, "you're up." He began to speak, halting at first, then steadier. "Pages, turn diagrams, referenced. Calculations quoted." He broke down the array systems, the passive scans, and why initiating a reboot without a chain of command relay during a silent drill was one of the most catastrophic actions you could take. At one point, Marsh interrupted. "Why is Sonar Protocol 7 Alpha always executed before 6 Charlie during a multi-frequency simulation?" Brooks didn't hesitate. "Because 6 Charlie filters Doppler shifted returns, which corrupts the wideband frequency bands used in 7. If you flip the order, the array misreads moving contacts as noise." The techs blinked. Marsh didn't move. Brooks went on for another 10 minutes. When he finally finished, the room was quiet. One of the techs nodded, slowly. "Not bad. Rookie. Still doesn't mean he's earned the crew's trust." Marsh muttered. But no one corrected him. No one needed to. Everyone had seen it, the sweat on Brooks' collar, the nervous breath, the pages trembling in his hand, but also the fire behind his words. The boy was scared. Yes, but scared in the right direction. That afternoon, during system maintenance, the sub detected a sonar ping. Real, not a drill. Unknown contact. Bearing 197. Range decreasing. Subsurface. Commander Sullivan leaned forward. In his chair. Confirmed. "Sir, it's not ours." Marsh tapped the screen. "Could be a Russian Akula, could be Chinese Songclass." Sullivan stared at the display. Silent running. Immediately, the boat shifted, tone lights dimmed, hums lowered, crew tightened. A heavy silence took over like pressure from the deep itself. Brooks was at his usual station now, this time with no instruction to touch anything, but he watched the sonar screen, analyzing every waveform like it was gospel. Then something strange happened, a pattern, an inconsistency in the contact echo. He leaned forward, his training fresh in his mind. "Sir," he whispered. "Permission to speak." Sullivan looked over. "I think that's a decoy ping, sir." Marsh raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Brooks zoomed the readout. "The signal shape is off. It's too clean. No Doppler distortions, no harmonics, and it's repeating in perfect intervals." Sullivan stepped up, looked a long silence. "Marsh," he said. "Confirm." Marsh recalibrated the data feed. His face changed. "Brooks is right. That's not a sub, that's a fake." A sigh of relief passed through the control room like air flooding a collapsing lung. Sullivan turned to Brooks. "Well spotted, Seaman." It wasn't praise, it wasn't even warm, but it was acknowledgement from a man who didn't give it lightly. Brooks didn't smile, he just nodded, eyes forward. Inside, though, something had shifted. Not pride, not glory. Belonging. Later that evening, in the cramped mess hall, a tray landed beside Brooks. It was Lasky. "Seats open," he said gruffly. Brooks blinked. "Ah, sure." Another sailor sat. Then another. No jokes, no high fists, just quiet acceptance, the kind that mattered more. One of them finally muttered, Nice eyes, rookie. We almost dove deeper for nothing. Brooks looked down, unsure how to answer. Lasky gave him a nod. You've still got a lot to prove, but you're on the path. That was enough. Sullivan stood in the con, alone, hours later. The sea around him was black, silent, limitless. He folded his hands behind his back. He'll make it, Marsh said behind him. He might, Sullivan replied. Or the sea might. Taken. Marsh tilted his head. You ever regret it, being down here this long? Sullivan didn't answer for a while. Then land teaches comfort, the sea teaches consequence. Marsh didn't argue. Sullivan turned his eyes back to the dark sonar screen. Down here, one mistake can end everything, but so can fear. The job isn't to avoid error, it's to forge men who can carry it and keep moving. The USS Franklin Pierce maintained silent glide mode through the dark waters of the North Atlantic, slicing through the depths with cold precision. Around her, nothing but black silence pressed from every direction, an abyss so total that even sonar struggled to make sense of it. Inside, the hum of machinery, the occasional footstep, and the soft hiss of oxygen filters were the only reminders that life endured in this steel coffin. But on day 6 of the patrol, life on board changed. It started with a minor systems error at 3:42 hours. Ensign Dillard reported a pressure differential in the starboard ballast tank barely above the variance threshold. Commander Sullivan's response was immediate. Initiate manual inspection. Quiet protocols remain in effect. 2 sailors were dispatched. Brooks, now grudgingly respected, volunteered to join Petty Officer Lasky for the inspection. He didn't ask for approval, he simply grabbed his toolkit and moved. You're getting brave, Lasky said, eyeing him sideways in the narrow corridor. Brooks replied without flinching. Just learning to walk where I stepped wrong. They reached the auxiliary ballast chamber. The space was tight, thick with the scent of hydraulic fluid and metal fatigue. Pipes hissed quietly. Lights flickered overhead. Lasky slid open the access panel while Brooks read the pressure gauges. Tank's stable, he said. Might be a sensor issue. Lasky crouched to inspect a weld seam. Wouldn't be the first time. These boats run 20 years past when they should retire. Brooks nodded, but they still float. Lasky smirked. That's the scary part. But as he reached into the panel, the overhead lights died. Total darkness. Then came a low, unnatural groan from the hull, like the submarine itself was in pain. Brooks froze. Did you hear? Shut up, Lasky whispered, listening hard. Another creak. This one longer. Sharper. They turned their flashlights on just in time to see water seeping from the wall seam behind the panel breach. Brooks said, panic. Rising. No, Lasky replied quickly. Hairline crack. Must have flexed too far on the last dive. Brooks stared at it. The water wasn't rushing, it was dripping. Slowly, but that didn't matter. At 700 feet, a crack the size of a fingernail could eventually tear the entire hull open. We need the chief of engineering now. 10 minutes later, the control room was buzzing with suppressed urgency. Sullivan reviewed the inspection report. Do we have an estimate on structural risk? Chief Price shook his head. Minimal for now, but if we dive deeper or shift ballast too fast, it could spiderweb. Pressure's unforgiving. Sullivan rubbed his temple. We maintained current depth. Begin immediate internal patch reinforcement. Quietly, he turned to Marsh. Have the crew briefed, but don't mention the crack. I don't want panic. We're already a can at the bottom of the world. Understood. Brooks stood at attention at the rear of the room, silent but aware. He didn't speak, but Sullivan gave him the briefest nod of recognition. That evening, Lasky found Brooks in the mess, staring into a cup of black coffee. You did good today, he said. Brooks looked up. Thanks, but it doesn't change anything. One crack in the wrong place. That's the job. Lasky shrugged. It's never about zero danger. It's about who keeps their head when the alarms start blinking. Brooks nodded slowly. And who doesn't touch the wrong panel? Lasky smiled grimly. Exactly. 2 days later, trouble returned this time. Not from the hull, but from above. Sonar contact. Real this time. Unidentified vessel. Closing from the northeast. Surface ship. Signature consistent with Yastreb class, Russian destroyer. Silence fell again. Commander Sullivan adjusted his chair. Distance, 8 kilometers. No sonar pings yet. Could be coincidence. Sullivan didn't believe in coincidence. Not down here, all silent. Change course. 2 degrees west. Dive 5 meters. Make it smooth. The boat obeyed, shifting like a ghost through the sea, but the destroyer adjusted to, followed the curve, still matching. A long pause, sounding active ping. 1 pulse. The sonar room went electric. 1 ping could mean many things. Curiosity, routine, or suspicion. Sullivan's jaw tightened. Prepare decoy protocols, just in case. Lieutenant Marsh keyed in the coordinates. We still have thermal masking from the undercurrent layer. They may lose us if we dive another 10 meters. Sullivan nodded. Execute. The sub slid deeper into the dark, threading the cold layer that muffled sonar returns. Minutes passed. No more pings. Then the contact turned slowly, veering east. They're moving away, came the report. A breath passed through the crew, but no one smiled. They all knew that wasn't luck. That was discipline. protocol, and no one twitching at the wrong moment. Later, Brooks stood outside the sonar bay, looking over the contact logs. He didn't flinch when Commander Sullivan approached, but he stood straighter. "You reviewed the ray this morning," Sullivan said. "You catch anything the others didn't?" Brooks blinked. "One thing. Minor could be noise, but during their second loop, the destroyer cut engine power for about 15 seconds. That's usually done when dropping passive sonar buoys." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "You sure?" Brooks nodded. "Not confirmed, but I'd bet on it." Sullivan was silent for a long moment. Then, "Log it, and monitor that frequency. If they did drop buoys, we'll need a new route home." Brooks turned to obey, and for the first time Sullivan's voice softened not much, just enough to be human. "You've improved." Brooks stopped. "I almost transferred you out on day one," Sullivan added, "but I needed to see if you'd break or adapt." Brooks swallowed. "And you bent. That's the right direction." Then he walked away. Back in the crew quarters, someone had left a note on Brooks' bunk that it wasn't signed, just for words, scrawled in sharp block letters. "You belong down here." Day 11 of patrol. The sea outside was quiet. Deceptively so. The USS Franklin Pierce floated silently, deep beneath the Greenland basin, operating at minimum power, running dark. A new patrol route had been charted to avoid the suspected sonar buoys Seaman Brooks had identified. His instincts had been correct again, and that was beginning to mean something. But peace on a submarine rarely lasts at 206 hours. The silence shattered a reactor control and stable core temp reading. "Verify. Confirmed, sir." Temperature spike in the secondary coolant loop. Reactor coolant pumps reporting 16% variance. Commander Sullivan didn't raise his voice. He never did. "Emergency shutdown sequence begin now." Crew members scrambled to their stations. A power loss at these depths wasn't just inconvenient, it was catastrophic. Without propulsion, they were a sinking coffin. Inside the control room, red lights flickered, alarms buzzed, but the systems weren't failing. Someone had overridden the backup flow controls. Brooks was in the reactor diagnostics bay, helping Chief Engineer Price run a manual bypass when they found it. Fuse relabeled deliberately .sabotage. Price. Single quotes. S face went pale. "This isn't damage, this was intentional." Brooks nodded. "That explains the override signals. Someone wanted this system to fail." Price immediately called it in. Within 5 minutes, Sullivan and Marsh were standing in the bay, staring down the open panel. Sullivan's voice dropped to something colder than water. "Whoever did this wanted to take out the propulsion and kill the backup loop. That would have left us dead in the water," Marsh muttered. "Or worse, if the primary coolant boiled off." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "Reactor meltdown." Sullivan turned to the crew. "No one leaves their post. No one moves alone. Chief Price, I want internal system logs pulled from the last 24 hours. We find who accessed this panel." He turned to Brooks. "You're with me." They returned to the command deck. Sullivan was visibly tense now, angry, not panicked, just quiet, focused. "I never thought I'd see internal sabotage on my boat," he said, barely above a whisper. Brooks glanced at him. "Sir, if someone's trying to damage the sub, do you think they're one of ours?" Sullivan didn't answer right away. Then, "On a submarine, ours is the only kind. There's..." An hour later, Chief Price brought the report. Panel was accessed by one person between 1:12 and 1:23 hours. He handed over a tablet. Sullivan read the name. Petty Officer Halvorsen. Marsh's eyes widened. "He was assigned to torpedo maintenance last week. No reason he'd be here." Sullivan wasted no time. "Find him. Detain him. No alarms." The internal security team located Halvorsen asleep in his quarters, or pretending to be when confronted. He didn't resist, but his face was blank, emotionless. They brought him to the mess hall, cleared and locked down for interrogation. Sullivan entered alone. "What were you trying to do?" he asked. Voice calm. Halvorsen stared past him. "You don't understand. Explain it to me. They don't tell us everything. They hide things from us. From all of us. You think this ship is just a deterrent? You think it's here for defense?" He leaned forward, voice low. "But I've seen the sealed orders, Commander. I know where we were really heading before we rerouted." Sullivan didn't flinch. "And you were going to launch. This sub carries enough firepower to erase a country. I wasn't going to let that happen." The room was quiet. "You think disabling the reactor helps prevent war?" Sullivan asked. Halvorsen's face twisted. "It prevents you." Sullivan stood there for a long moment. "Then, you're relieved of duty, effective immediately." 2 MPs escorted Halvorsen to the containment chamber near aft storage. No one spoke. Marsh shook his head. "He could have killed us all." Sullivan just nodded once. "That's why we have protocols." For the next 24 hours, the crew worked in shifts to verify every inch of wiring, every fuse, every circuit. Brooks stayed up, alongside Chief Price, tracing control loops, confirming software permissions, and installing tamper alerts. When the final diagnostic was complete, Sullivan gathered the crew in the central briefing room. There he spoke plainly. "All heard what happened, and what almost happened. Let me be clear, this boat operates on 3 things: trust, training, and truth. We've survived storms, evaded destroyers, and held this ship together under pressure most men never imagine. He looked slowly across the room. And yet tonight, it was almost undone by one of our own. No one spoke. We survived because of alert eyes, because someone noticed a discrepancy, because someone followed the protocols we drill every week. Without fail, he turned to Brooks, and that person wasn't me. The room turned. He didn't pull rank. He didn't take charge. He just did his job. And that's why we're still breathing. Brooks' ears burned, but he didn't look. Away, Sullivan stepped forward. This sub is a machine, but the men inside it are what make it deadly or doomed. Your decisions, your discipline. He turned to Marsh. Set the course for return. We're heading home. 4 days later, as the Franklin Pierce rose through the cold gray waters of the Atlantic and broke surface, the crew gathered topside in staggered shifts for air. The first breath of sunlight after 11 days underwater felt like rebirth. Brooks stood near the rear tower staring across the horizon. Lasky joined him. We'll dock in 2 days. You got anyone waiting? Brooks shook his head. No. Really? Lasky nudged him with his elbow. You got us. Brooks smiled faintly. Guess I do. In the command room, Marsh leaned against the chart table, watching Sullivan finish his final entry log. So, Marsh said, still believe in second chances? Sullivan looked up. I believe in earned chances. And Brooks earned his. Marsh nodded. You think he's staying in? He'll make chief someday, Sullivan said. Really? Or maybe even take my seat. He stood, stretched, and looked out over the calm water. The sea doesn't care who you are. It just asks one thing of you. Marsh raised an eyebrow. What's that? Don't break. Closing message to viewers. On land, you can make mistakes and walk away. Underwater, a single error can mean 100 funerals. The Navy doesn't train for comfort, it trains for survival. And survival means following orders, trusting your crew, and never, ever breaking protocol. Would you have kept your cool in Seaman Brooks' position? Let us know in the comments and share your thoughts on the meaning of discipline in high-pressure environments. And if you enjoyed this deep-sea story, make sure to subscribe to Authority Watch and hit the bell so you never miss another tale from the silent depths.